Today we're going to have a creative conversation and talk about how we can remove those blockages that a lot of us experience when we're trying to be creative or when we're in our creative juice.
Great. We'll get rid of all of those blocks right away.
Because this is Eric, and Eric Maisel is actually the author of over 30 books. You're a creative coach, so you're definitely the one to speak to about creativity. And this is your latest one, Mastering Creative Anxiety. So tell us about those. Tell us about this creative journey. Why did you start? Why did you become a creative coach, first of all?
I started out as a novelist a long time ago, 40 years ago, and wrote maybe a dozen novels. Got nice reviews, didn't make money, retooled as a therapist. So I'm also a licensed California family therapist. Then I didn't like the medical model very much. I didn't think the people I was seeing had mental disorders. I thought they were just the ordinary problems of living. So I segued into being creativity coaching for maybe the last 15 years or so.
So who does this apply to? Is it for everybody or just writers and painters?
Well, mostly self-identified creative and performing artists. I think they're the people for whom the book would be most interesting, namely writers, painters, actors, musicians. But everybody wants to be creative in the sense that I think it's the word we now use for manifesting potential. It's the new word for the human potential movement from 30 or 40 years ago. So I think everybody wants to manifest their potential and be creative in that sense. But until you self-identify as an artist, you don't have a lot of these challenges arise in you. It's easy to paint a picture and not care about it unless you've identified yourself as a painter. Then suddenly everything gets more important. And when things are important, that's when anxiety rears its head.
So when there's deadlines and when there is an audience and when
your ego's involved, if you're just painting something to put, in your kitchen, that's not quite the same as having it on display in a gallery and having people criticize it or reject it. So it's that sense when things begin to matter more because you're putting it out in the world. That's when your ego's involved, and that's when anxiety raises its head. And you probably know, the number one phobia in the world is not fear of flying or fear of snakes or fear of anything you can think of. It's fear of public speaking.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, so that shows how powerful the danger we feel about exposing ourselves, even if it's just giving a little talk, at our work or something. That profoundly scares us, which is surprising, but it's the truth. So it's in that sense, when we're trying to put ourselves out there, whether as a writer or a painter or an actor or musician, we're trying to put ourselves out there, then anxiety is going to rise up in us.
So is the ego voice that says you're not good enough for this, or you're not going to achieve what you want, or
you're going to get harmed? Yeah,
or you're going to get harmed.
That sense of danger, because we really, most people really experience criticism as pretty toxic, not as something they can slough off easily. It would be good if they could. It would be good if they were easier with how the world treats them, how, what they think about criticism. It'd be better if they had a thicker skin, but most people don't. As you know, actors will remember one bad review and not remember hundreds of good ones. But that's just somehow what kind of creature we are. We remember the criticism much more than the praise. So that's why.
And it's important to liberate ourselves from anxiety. Otherwise, we cannot really be connected in the present moment, let this creative flow unfold naturally, because it's quite a natural process, isn't it? It is,
and we can't try to avoid it. That's a bad plan, because if you try to avoid anxiety, the normal way we try to avoid anxiety is to flee the encounter. If you're afraid of flying, you just stay far away from the airport, but then you can't fly to Paris because you've stayed far away from the airport. So trying to avoid the anxiety isn't really a good plan. For creative people, if they try to avoid the anxiety, often what they'll do is repeat themselves, because that feels safe. So if they know how to make one kind of painting, they'll make it again and again for the next 50 years. And that feels good in one sense, in the sense that they haven't generated anxiety, but they haven't really been creative for those 50 years. They haven't stretched themselves. So trying to avoid anxiety isn't the best plan. The best plan is to invite it in, to embrace it, and then to manage it. It's the managing part that's so important. You don't want to invite it in and just feel shaky. You want to invite it in and know what to do about it, how to manage it. So that's kind of the 2-point thing of inviting it in, but then learning how to manage it.
So how do you do that? How do you manage it?
Well, I think 22...
You talk to it?
I think I have 22 categories of anxiety management strategies in the book, so that means there are lots of ways to manage it. There isn't one perfect way. And it's great that there is a menu in the book because different things are going to feel congenial to different people. Something might work for one person and not for another. The simplest is still the old-fashioned deep breathing. That's still really the best way to reduce your experience of anxiety is, 5 seconds on the inhale, 5 seconds on the exhale, just doing a little breathing. The next smart thing is cognitive work. It's really noticing what language you're using to yourself to escalate the anxiety. How you're telling yourself, I don't know, there's too much competition, or I have no talent, or this is the worst thing I've ever done, or what have you, that kind of language. So you want to notice that language and try to dispute it and substitute better language. So those are just two of many, many kinds of tactics, namely a little deep breathing and some cognitive work. A really smart way to deal with anxiety is to marry those two ideas and to find some calming thought that works for you, like I'm perfectly fine or whatever calms you, and drop that into a deep breath and then use that breathing thinking combination as kind of your centering charm or your mantra. And people can do that, but like anything, they actually have to practice it and work at it.
I guess a good walk to in nature could help, huh?
It can. I mean, you can. The thing is, techniques like that are great, but they also take you away from your work. So you have to figure out what works for you when you're trying to write your novel.
And quite fast, then.
Yeah, and a lot of people have a great meditation practice in the morning or what have you, and so they feel really calm when they're done.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really help them necessarily when they have to talk to a literary agent or a gallery owner. So whatever tool you use has to work when you're actually anxious, not just when you're calm. And that's something a lot of creative people don't understand. They create a calming ritual for themselves, but that only works when they're actually calm. So that's one of the tricks, is finding something that works when you're feeling anxious.
Yeah, it requires quite a lot to snap out of that, because we are it's just like it's one after the next that's jumping in, and we're not.
And the way you say that is really true, because when you create, it's one choice after another. You have to choose your next question.
Constantly.
I have to choose my answer. Painter has to choose whether to put a little red on or a little blue on. Writer has to choose, whether to send her character to Paris or Zanzibar. It's one choice after another, and choosing provokes anxiety.
Yeah.
Even just choosing whether to have a good tasting cereal or a good for you cereal, or which car to buy, or anything. All of those choices provoke some anxiety. That's why we can't avoid anxiety in the process, because it's one choice after another, and that naturally provokes anxiety. So that's why we need some good strategies. I mentioned the two, the breathing and the thinking, but there are lots of others. There are relaxation techniques and guided visualizations and things called discharge techniques. There are a lot of things you can try. The headline, though, is to really own one, to not just read stuff and, have read about wonderful anxiety management strategies but never practice them. You really need to practice one and own it.
But I love what you say about getting into it and kind of, instead of avoiding it or pushing it away, really kind of get into that darkness or that shadow part, I guess, or that negative, and kind of heal it. It needs healing too, doesn't it? Does it heal itself over time? Do you find that?
I think what happens if you get good at this and smart at this is that you start to extinguish the language that's provoking the anxiety. You don't even bother to think any longer, there's too much competition, I'm not talented, this is a mess, etc. You don't even bother to think those things because you've already disputed them so many times that they sort of know not even to arise. So that's the beautiful thing of doing anxiety management work for real, is that you do become calmer over time, because the thoughts that are making you anxious don't even bother to arise.
I love how we can even be fearful and scared and get anxiety from being successful or failing, both ways, right?
Yeah, well, just think about what success really means. It's a paradoxical state, because if you're a successful person, you're supposed to repeat yourself. You're supposed to produce the same work that you're known for, and you're supposed to top yourself simultaneously. And that's really an odd situation. They want you to sing your most famous song and you want to go somewhere else now. And if you're stuck needing to sing all of your most famous songs, there's almost no room for growth. So that's just one aspect of why even success can be anxiety provoking. And of course, the other big piece of it is now you're out in the public's eye, and they're going to care if you, gain 5 pounds or who your new lover is or what. You're just going to be under that kind of scrutiny that's really terribly difficult for most people.
And then just, yeah, and the responsibility to, I guess, like for a writer to produce another great book after that. I mean, there is some...
There's that responsibility, and if you're successful, then you're also paying for the jobs of a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And so
the accountability.
You're responsible in that sense also. And creative and performing artists who haven't made it, who aren't successful, don't really think that successful artists have the same challenges still. But they do. I work with, you know, world famous artists, and they have exactly the same sorts of challenges. Yes, they have more resources. Yes, they have more money, but they have the same amount, if not more, of anxiety.
Yeah, probably the more you go up, the more you need to handle, right?
And their deadlines are more real. You know, it's one thing if you are writing your novel, but you're not under contract, you can keep moving the completion date out as you need it. But if there's a real deadline with a lot of people counting on it and all kinds of publicity going to start at a certain...
What else do we need to know here?
Well, one of the things that I try to sell clients on is the idea of a morning creativity practice, that it's really important to show up more than it's important to attach to outcomes. All creative and performing artists get too attached to outcomes, too attached to the thing in front of them. Naturally, they want it to be good, they want to excel, but also you have to let go of caring whether it excels or not, because the reality of process is that only some of the things you do are going to be excellent. So you have to relax there and show up. And a morning creativity practice is just a great way to show up, and that's to try to carve out an hour before your day starts, which is hard for people, of course. Already their days are long, but that's really the best way to get your creating in place, is to carve out that hour before the day starts. If you do that, there are three big benefits. One is you get a lot of work done, a lot of creative work done. The second is you get to use your sleep thinking, because you know that we think during the night as well as dream. We dream in REM sleep and we think in non-REM sleep. So we do a lot of thinking, but as soon as we turn to the day, that's gone. So if you turn to creating first, you get to use your sleep thinking in your work, which is very powerful. And then the third reason, the most important, is if you turn to your work first thing each day, you'll have the experience of making meaning on that day already. And the rest of the day can be half meaningless and you won't get depressed. But if you try to do it the other way around, if you just spend your normal day doing your routine duties and errands and responsibilities, people tend to get a little blue through that day because they know that they haven't gotten to their real work. And then they try to get to it by the evening, but now they're too blue and too tired. And they end up kind of in an existentially depressed place, often for decades, just a little bit of blueness. So if you turn that around and make meaning each day first thing, it's kind of an existential cure for that kind of blueness. And that's why this morning creativity practice is so important.
I love Julia Cameron also teaches that. I've interviewed her. She's wonderful in the artist way.
She does, but her morning pages often can be a substitute for one's real work. So people have to watch out. If they've done morning pages for 20 years and have tons of journals but have never gotten to their novel, they just have to be careful if they're using their morning pages as a substitute for their actual work. So, and a lot of people do the morning pages. So that's just something for a person to be aware of, that they may be pouring all of their good juices into the morning pages and then actually have no thoughts left for their actual work.
Because really, I mean, going back to what we were saying earlier too, is that we're not really the one in charge of all this, is it? I mean, where is creativity coming from? It's kind of interesting how our ego gets in, whereas most of us, I mean, some people can write a book in a few hours and that's it. Where did this came from? You know, how come
I have a kind of brain-based way of looking at it rather than a spiritual-based way of looking at it, and that is that neurons have to gather together for there to be work to happen, for us to have thoughts. And so the more we're having small ideas all day long, I need to pick up my kids at 3, or what's for dinner, or what have you, we're actually stealing neurons from our brain, and we don't have enough neurons left for our big thoughts. That's why I think both East and West have the same idea here about the idea of quieting the mind and releasing the grip of neurons. I think that when we get quiet in the sense in which we're talking, then you get all of your neurons back, and that's when big thoughts want to arise. That's when you get the idea for your novel. That's why when clients come to me, and often they're very sort of sad and disappointed, maybe they have an MFA in writing and they've read 1 million books and they just don't know why they don't have a good idea for a novel. and they think they're ruined somehow, or they're just very disappointed in themselves. And what I know is the case is that the only problem is that their brain is too noisy, that they're thinking too many small things, and they've never had the opportunity for that big thought to arise. So just by getting them to be quieter and calm down a little, then that thought, which has been so near to hand for so long, suddenly can bubble up and they can get their work done.
Well, this is very interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Very juicy conversation. It's amazing how different creative people interpret this in a different way. And most of the time, I get to speak with creative people that really, say, "Oh, I have to really dissociate with this process because it's beyond what," and they try to remove themselves out of the way. A lot of painters say that. A lot of artists, composers, a lot of writers. So it's interesting how you say it. You speak about it on a brain level, and how we should free that space, that hard drive space up.
That's right. And how much we have to show up. I'm not that big on inspiration. I'm much more on showing up, because every 5th day you'll be inspired, but you need to have been there those other 4 days for the 5th day to come.
So there needs a certain rigor too, huh?
Yes.
Would you say you just rather sit down there and then...
Yes. And it's really not so much about discipline. Pavarotti has a nice quote. It's something like, people say I'm disciplined, but it's not discipline, it's devotion, and there's a big difference. And it is, it's about love and enthusiasm and curiosity. You want to be in love with your work, and then you'll want to be sitting there.
Yeah, that's where you get the juice. This is a juicy conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Much love from California.
We feel about exposing ourselves, even if it's just giving a little talk, at our work or something. That profoundly scares us, which is surprising, but it's the truth. So it's in that sense, when we're trying to put ourselves out there, whether as a writer or a painter or actor or musician, we're trying to put ourselves out there, then anxiety is going to rise up in us.
So is the ego voice that says you're not good enough for this, or you're not going to achieve what you want, or
you're going to get harmed? Yeah,
or you're going to get harmed.
That sense of danger, because we really, most people really experience criticism as pretty toxic, not as something they can slough off easily. When your ego's involved, if you're just painting something to put, in your kitchen, that's not quite the same as having it on display in a gallery and having people criticize it or reject it. So it's that sense, when things begin to matter more because you're putting it out in the world, that's when your ego's involved, and that's when anxiety raises its head. And you probably know, the #1 phobia in the world is not fear of flying or fear of snakes or fear of anything you can think of. It's fear of public speaking.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, so that shows just shows how powerful the danger.
Today we're going to have a creative conversation and talk about how we can remove those blockages that a lot of us experience when we're trying to be creative or when we're in our creative juice.
Great, we'll get rid of all of those blocks right away.
Because this is Eric, and Eric Maisel is actually the author of over 30 books. You're a creative coach, so you're definitely the one to speak to about creativity. And this is your latest one, Mastering Creative Anxiety. So tell us about this creative journey. Why did you become a creative coach, first of all?
I started out as a novelist a long time ago, 40 years ago, and wrote maybe a dozen novels. Got nice reviews, didn't make money, retooled as a therapist. So I'm also a licensed California family therapist. Then I didn't like the medical model very much. I didn't think the people I was seeing had mental disorders. I thought they were just the ordinary problems of living. So I segued into being creativity coaching for maybe the last 15 years or so.
So who does this apply to? Is it for everybody, or just writers and painters?
Well, mostly self-identified creative and performing artists. I think they're the people for whom the book would be most interesting, namely writers, painters, actors, musicians. But everybody wants to be creative in the sense that I think it's the word we now use for manifesting potential. It's the new word for the human potential movement from 30 or 40 years ago. So I think everybody wants to manifest their potential and be creative in that sense. But until you self-identify as an artist, you don't have a lot of these challenges arise in you. It's easy to paint a picture and not care about it unless you've identified yourself as a painter. Then suddenly everything gets more important. And when things are important, that's when anxiety rears its head.
So when there's deadlines and when there is an audience and when